Good morning and happy Sabbath. Good to see you all. I hope you had a lovely week. And I would like to thank God for giving us good health and who has enabled us to come in here to come and worship Him and to give Him honor and glory. A special welcome to our visitors who may be joining us for the first time. We are privileged to have you. It's a blessing to always have visitors. Please come again. Before we begin our service, may I just ask you to bow your heads with me as we pray. Our precious Heavenly Father, once again we come before your presence with humility to come and worship you. Father, as we look into your word, please bless us with it and help us, Lord, to be brought closer to you. And this we ask and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. This morning, I have a special message for you, and it is entitled, When God Spoke English. When God Spoke English. What we're going to do is, as we look at this, we'll look at how the King James Version of the Bible was created. And of course, you and I most probably know that it was King James who was behind this publication. So we're going to find who King James is. We will see when his reign was. When was he in power? But I guess the most important thing we're going to find out is, why did he embark on this massive project? Why did he do it in the first place? We'll look at how he did it. What procedure did he follow to do this particular project? And then we are going to see there's a portion of the King James Version which was taken out, and it's called the Apocrypha. We'll find out what happened to it. Because if you check in your Bible, you won't be able to see it. Do we have any comment from the pen of inspiration? Did Ellen White say anything about the King James Version? These are some things that we're going to look at. And we'll also find out whether the type of English that we have in the King James Version is exactly the same one which was used when this particular Bible was written. Was the publication error-free? Was it perfect when it came out of the press? Were there any errors? And if they were, what are they? And what can we learn from them? During the time of King James, were there any other Bible translations? And if they were, why did he continue going on with this particular project? In addition, we will see whether what was happening in England at the time was also happening in some other European countries. And then finally, we're going to see what legacy he left behind. And therefore, we can also look at what legacy I'm going to leave behind when my time comes. And we're going to see what legacy you're going to leave behind when your time comes. So one day when I was going to work, I was driving and I was listening to the radio. And it was around this time last year, 2019. And there was an interview which was happening, and someone was being interviewed. And this person was an author who was also a journalist. Because of what he was talking about, I got curious and I decided to listen. He talked of a book that you may have in your house this morning. He talked of a book that my family and I have in our house this morning. This is about the King James Version of the English Bible. And I would like to believe that there's one lying around in your house. We got ours way back somewhere in the US, in New York. And up to today, we still have this book because it's so special to us. This book, it is not an ordinary Bible that you may have. This book, it is It is very special. It's the most famous translation in history that you can have. And we're going to see how this book has been a blessing to most of us this morning. And so the author that I'm going to quote in most of this presentation this morning is Adam Nicholson. He is the one that was being interviewed. So sit back and let's listen together what we have in this book, which is so special and which made me to go ahead and buy the book. And I told myself one day when I have an opportunity, I will share it with the church. And here we are. Have you ever wondered what happens to people when you speak their language unexpectedly? It is always amazing to see how people react. So, oh, he knows he can speak German, or he can speak this language. They really get surprised, and you get their attention. Why? Because they get so amazed that you can speak this language, or you can speak their language rather. Could this have been the situation when God spoke English? Could this have been the situation when King James decided to write on this particular version of the Bible? Sometimes it's called the authorized version. Sometimes it's called some other thing, but we are going to call it this morning the King James Version. Let us read together Acts chapter 2, and we'll see verses 6 up to 8. Now, whenever possible, I will not be using the King James Version. I may be using the New King James Version. And when this sound occurred, the multitude came together and were confused because everyone heard them speak in their own language. Verse 7 says, "Then they were all amazed and marveled, saying one to another, 'Look, are not all these people who speak Galileans? And how is it that we can hear, each in our own language, in which we are born?'" As you might recall, this is the instance at the Pentecost when the disciples started preaching to the people. And because these people spoke a different language, they were amazed because suddenly they could hear what the disciples were saying. Now, scholars here do have a difference. Some say that, yes, it's the disciples that were speaking in the language of the people. Some say, no, it's the people who were given the gift to listen or to be able to understand what the disciples were saying. But don't forget, it's the disciples that had just been blessed with the Holy Spirit. And because of that, they could be able to speak in a language that local people could be able to understand. It was a mixed multitude, as you'd appreciate, but these people, they were able to comprehend what the disciples were understanding. By the way, that word sound, in the Greek language, it is telephono. And that's the word where we derive the English word phone or telephone. It's the word which was used there as sound. And so they could be able to understand what was happening. So let's go ahead and have a look. So could it be that this was a special day that was given or which had been blessed for those people to fully understand what the disciples were saying? I like languages myself, and if I can, I would like to speak in different languages. For example, if I go to Samoa, I would be able to say talofa, and I'm sure I can be able to get around. I may not know much, but that is sufficient for me to get around. If I went to Tonga, I might say malololei, and I'm sure they'll be able to welcome me. If I went to Fiji, I'll be able to say bula or bula vinaka, and I'll be welcomed, because at least they'll be able to understand me. On the other hand, if I went to Papua New Guinea, well, I can say avinun or avinunpla, and I can use the same greeting if I went to the Solomon Islands. Now, because we live in the Pacific Ocean, in the Oceania, if I went to Japan, I'll be able to say konnichiwa, and I'll be welcomed. And if I went to mainland China, I'll be able to say ni hao, and I'll surely be able to be welcomed. Our closest neighbor, if I went to Indonesia, I'll be able to say Selamat Pagi, and they'll be able to understand me. Cross a little bit, if I went to India, on the part where they speak Hindi, I can be able to say Namaste, and I'm sure be able to understood. If I go further in the Middle East, I'll say Salam Alaikum, and they'll be able to understand me. So when God spoke English, there could be a time when God spoke your language. You might be in Europe today, or you might be in Africa today, or you might be in the Americas. God has spoken your language at one time, and you communicate with him using the language that he spoke to you with. You may be holding the Bible this morning, which is written in your language, and that would be the way God spoke to you. So, who was King James? As I've said earlier on, King James is the person, the king that was behind this massive project that you and I benefit from every day, and this morning in particular. We're going to see who King James was. So King James, his full name was James Charles Stewart. He was the unlikely hero to be able to come into this reign. Why? Because King James came from Scotland. King James was the child of Queen Mary, and in the spring of September 1603, Queen Elizabeth of England died. And this queen did not have any child. She was not blessed with any child. And so the next person to inherit the kingdom was this man who is behind this massive project which we're looking at this morning. And his name was James Charles Stewart. I don't know if you know, but James in the Greek language, it is Jacobus. That's how it is said in Greece. So, and that's why sometimes during his reign, King James was referred to as Jacobean reign, because in Greek, it's written as Jacobus. So in 1603, Queen Elizabeth dies, and who comes in? James Stewart. He comes in. And this man, he was the unlikely hero to be able to take over the reign of this king who had just died. Why? Well, he was ugly, according to the book that I read. This man was not one who would impress me, but he was ugly. He was restless, unfortunately. He was a redhead, as they would say, and he was pale-skinned. His tongue, it was said, was too big for his mouth. That was King James. He was impatient as well. He was clever and very nervous. But what we find is that this unlikely hero became the king. His upbringing was very, very disturbed. Why? Because he never saw his mother after he was one. It was a very, very difficult situation for him. The mother had to live where he was because of the instability which was happening in the kingdom, thanks to the priests then who were able to raise him up. He says, King James himself, I was alone, he wrote, without father or mother or brother or sister, king of this realm and how a parent of the kingdom of England. Now, what you are seeing on the screen is not a mistake. That was the language which was being spoken then. I was alone, if I were to read it properly. But that is, I was alone. Of course, today the language has been transformed. I was alone, he says, without a mother and without a father. Neither did I have any brothers or sisters, he says. He was king of Scotland and heir apparent to the kingdom of England. This morning, I would like to commend you if you're one of the donors for Asian Aid. Why? Because with this organization, Asian Aid, we can be able to support children who are like King James. If you are a donor of Asian Aid, May God bless you abundantly. Of course, there are some other charities that you may be supporting, but this particular one looks after children who are orphans. Also, I would like to commend you. If you are a donor in the Smith family, you may have seen children who can hardly be able to do much at school. Why? Because they don't have a mother, because they don't have a father, they don't have any siblings at all. And may God bless you abundantly if you are one of those people that donate to look after children who are orphans. When was King James' reign? When was he in power? King James reigned Scotland as soon as he was about 2 years old. He was born on the 19th of June, 1566. That's when he was born. And the following year, 1567, King James, or James Stuart rather, became the King of England. He was a child king, but he started reigning in Scotland as a king. But of course, we are talking about King James as the King of England. So when did he start reigning in England itself? We find that in 1603, when Queen Elizabeth had died, King James was invited to come from Scotland to come in and reign. And this man reigned until 1625, when he went to rest. At that time, the Kingdom of Scotland and the Kingdom of England were separate states. But he was able to go their own judiciary, they had their own laws, but being ruled by the time James came into power by one king, whose life we're looking at this morning. King James, as I said, he died on in March 1625, and he had a dream when he was in power. He had a dream like Martin Luther King. And what was his dream? This is going to lead us to why King James decided to embark on this project. At that time, the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Scotland, there was so much instability. It was the time when England had just had a war with Spain, and people or citizens were longing for peace, and this peace was not coming. As long as Elizabeth was in power, this peace was not coming at all. So when James ascended to the throne, one of his objectives, one of the dreams which he had, was to have peace in England. In addition, there was also instability because of the Puritans. There were Puritans and there were separatists. These were people who were so devoted to the Bible and to God whom they believed in, that there was nothing that could serve them. And for some reason, they had a huge difference with those who were Catholics, and they did not want to be part of the English kingdom. So this was causing a lot of turmoil or grief to King James. And so he told himself, well, if only I become King of England, my dream is to be able to unify these two kingdoms for the sake of our country. He is the one, or just before that, someone coined the term the Great Britain. And when he came into power, that, of course, put on some more impetus when we had the James going into power. So it kind of got a Jacobean impetus. As we saw, Jacob is the equivalent of James in the Greek language. So here we are. James is trying to make this country to be one, so that he could be able to have peace in the country. And how did he do it? Or what method was he going to use? And so he told himself, well, if I can be able to have maybe a single currency, that will help us. And if I can be able to have some other ways to bring this country together, that would be very much helpful. But in addition, he thought, well, if we can write the Bible, if I can be able to help our country to publish a Bible which is better than all the other ones which had been published, maybe that would help us to be able to be a united country. And we find that he put on that particular project, and we find the project starting off in the year 1604. That's when it was commissioned. So 1605, 1606, they were writing this Bible. 1608, 1609, the whole project came to fruition in 1611 when this particular Bible was published. But you may ask, and I may ask, and this is one of the things which made me to share this message with you this morning. How did he do it? Was it himself who sat down with maybe a couple of his advisors to write this Bible? So how did he do this? Please turn with me to the book of Exodus, chapter 18, verse 14. Exodus chapter 18, verse 14, it says, "So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, 'What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit, and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?' Why? The whole day you are sitting alone." We find from the book Patriarchs and Prophets, page 301, tells us that Jethro, who was Moses' father-in-law, remained in the camp, and he saw how heavy the burden was on Moses. And this burden, of course, just rested on him. So in order to maintain order and discipline among the vast, ignorant, and untrained multitude, it was indeed a stupendous task. So Jethro remonstrated against this, saying, "This thing is too heavy for you. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. Thou wilt surely wear yourself away." This was the advice that he gave to his son-in-law, Moses. Moses was a very humble man. He was a leader, as you might appreciate. He had a huge congregation. He had a huge team or multitude that he was leading. But let's read further. Let's go to the book of Exodus, chapter 18, verses 21 and 22. We find that Moses now is being advised to get some people to help him. In there, you're going to find God advises him to get people who are of good repute to be able to help him with this work, and put people in groups of 10s and 20s and 50s to be able to do the work efficiently. And he did that. He did listen to Jethro, the father-in-law. And because of that, Moses was able to do work in a better way than he did it when he was just doing alone. So how did he do it? We read in the book of Exodus chapter 18, verses 21 and 22. It says here, "Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers over thousands, to be rulers over hundreds, rulers over 50s, and rulers over 10s. And let them judge the people all the times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge, so that it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you." That is the advice that Jethro gave to his son-in-law. As a leader, it is for your blessing that you become a team player. As a leader, it is not a good idea to work like Moses did initially, when he sat the whole day working alone under some tree, I would imagine. Why? Because on your team, you've been blessed with some people who may have complementary gifts as you do. On your team, there are some people who probably even work better than you do. And it's a good idea to sit down, to share the Lord with those people. And that's how we can be able to serve God. That's how we can be able to effectively lead the team that has been assigned to you. And therefore, may I encourage you this morning to ensure that you work with others in your team. Because in the world, you're going to find they'll always look for somebody who is a team player. There are very, very few job adverts where they'll be able to look for somebody who is a loner. May I encourage you this morning to work with others. May I encourage you this morning to be able to work with your team. May I encourage you this morning to be able to delegate work. If you do not, there's a risk that you're going to have some burnouts, which won't be good for you, neither will it be good for your church. What has all this to do with King James and the Bible? King James was a smart man. He came up with what was called then companies to do different tasks of translating the Bible. There were 6 companies which he created, and those companies were assigned different tasks. The first company was located at Westminster, and therefore it was called the First Westminster Company. This particular company was led by a team leader called Lancelot Andrew. This man was such a scholar that he could speak 15 languages in his time. Of course, besides English, probably he spoke French, could have spoken Latin, spoke Germany, might have spoken some Dutch, could have spoken some Spanish, and so on and so forth. He was appointed to be the leader for the team that was stationed at Westminster. And this team, their task was to translate the Bible, beginning from the book of Genesis all the way up to 2 Kings. That was the task which they were assigned. We got to the second company. This company was called the First Cambridge Company, and it was led by a man called Edward Lively. These people were located at Cambridge University. As you may know, Cambridge University is one of those renowned universities in the UK. It was founded in the year 1209, and it is the second oldest English university that was ever established. Some of you may have read some books which were published by Cambridge. Some of you may have had some association with Cambridge. This particular company was given the task to be able to translate the books from 2 Samuel. So after that, of course, you've got the First Chronicles. They were the ones who were tasked to translate that. They were the ones who translated 2 Chronicles. They translated Ezra. They translated Nehemiah. They translated Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs. They translated the Ecclesiastes. And finally, their task was also to translate the Song of Solomon. The next set of books in the Bible were translated by the First Oxford Company. Now, you may, in the recent past, have heard of Oxford University. And this is the same university which was assigned to be able to translate the books from the book of Isaiah up to the book of Malachi. And it was this particular team or company was led by a man named John Harding. And so they translated the books from Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, and all the way up to Malachi. From there, we then have a set of books which are called the Apocrypha, and the company that looked after them is called the Second Cambridge Company. And this set of books, today we would not have them in the Bible because in 1885 they had to be removed. After that, we had the Second Oxford Company, and their task was also to be able to translate the book of the Gospels, the Acts of Apostles, and the book of Revelation. That was the job which they gave them to be able to do. Then we had the Second Cambridge Company, which was led also by a man called John DuPaul. This man and his company, they were given the task to translate the New Testament epistles. Why? Because this particular group and this section of the Bible contains epistles that Paul wrote. And Paul, as you may know, is a scholar. And it was very, very challenging to be able to translate the books that Paul wrote. So they had to find the best group which could be able to understand Paul's writings. And they gave this task to this man called John DuPont. And they were based at Cambridge University as well. After that, we have the second Oxford company. This company was led by a man called Thomas Ravis. And their task was to look at the book of the Apocrypha, which was also needed to be translated. And finally, we have the Second Westminster Company. Second Westminster Company, they were given the task to be able to translate the New Testament epistles and all the books that may not fall in this category, like the book of Hebrews, the book of 1st and 2nd Peter, and the book of John and James and Jude. So these ones were given to the Second Westminster Company, and who were based at Westminster. This is how King James decided to partition the jobs so that they could be done efficiently. This was how he thought he could best be able to do it and translate the Bible in the most efficient way. As you can see, King James was a very smart person. Why? Because here we are, he did apply principles of project management, which are what? He broke down the work into chunks which could easily be done. In project management, we talk about work breakdown structures. And this is what he did with the companies. He assigned specific tasks to those companies to be able to translate. From there onwards, we see that the work was done very, very efficiently. And of course, as we have already seen, that the Bible was finally published in the year 1611. I'll spend a little bit about talking about the Apocrypha. This is a selection of books which has been removed from King James Version. And they were removed Apocrypha in the year 1885. It's a Greek word. And so the version of the Bible that you and I have today does not contain these particular books. So what's special about these books? Apocrypha is a Greek word, and it is singular for the word apocryphan. Now, that originally denoted something which is hidden or something which is secret. And these books were only used by initiates to some Christian groups. And the second part of that word, apo means hidden. Then krypha, in Greek Cretan, that aware. So put together, apocrypha, hidden away. And so these books were hidden away, and they were only used when it was time for initiation to special groups of Christians. Now, Apocrypha writings were hidden not because of divinity, not at all, but because of their questionable value. They were false, and they were bad, and they were heretical. For that reason, in 1885, they were taken out. And as we saw, this was given, or this portion of the Bible, then Bible rather, I should say, was given to a group to be able to translate as well. Some examples of Apocrypha, there used to be a book called Estratus, the first and second Estratus, or the book Judith, or the book Barak. These were some books which were in the original King James Version, which was published in 1611. And later on, 1885, were taken out. Do we have any comments from the Book of Inspiration about this Bible called the King James Version? If we do, what does the pen of inspiration say? What does it tell us? As far as Ellen White was concerned, she did not specifically commend any particular version of the Bible. Her habit was to be able to read widely, to read different Bible versions, and to choose the version which best explained what she wanted to put across. And so around this time when the Bible, the KJV Bible, was being revised, there were regular updates which were being published in the Review and Herald, where we find Ellen White putting comments or commenting about what was being done and keeping the believers abreast with what was happening. And I would like to believe that she did commend the team when they eventually took out in 1885 the Apocrypha books. That was her stand. She does not comment directly about any particular Bible version, but as I said, she read widely and was able to use all that she could find in different various Bibles, including, of course, the King James Version and other Bible versions that we're going to find shortly. There were a number of articles that appeared, and people were always, or believers were always kept updated with what was happening so that nobody was lost. Now, is the language that we find in the King James Version of the Bible, is that the language that was being used then? The form of the English language that we find? Or could it be that maybe they were using a different language? That has always puzzled me. But of course, today, as you may realize it, we have different portions of the Bible. Let's find out and see what was happening. The author of the book that I read, Adam Nicholson, describes it this way. He says, the King James Bible had been at least in the mainstream unchallenged for 270 years, from about 8 to 9 generations. Its language is archaic, he says, meaning it's obsolete, it's out of date, it's old-fashioned. Even in 1611 itself, the language was archaic. It was derived from a form of English current in the mid-16th century, in the 1500s. That's the type of English they used to speak. He further says, had come to seem like the language spoken by God. That's the way he sees it. So it is not the language which every person would speak on the streets in London then, or maybe in England. It was outdated language, but for some reason, King James thought this was the language that he chose, which was going to be used to write the Bible in, which we call today the King James Version. And that's why we have the New King James Version, and we have other Bible versions which we're going to see shortly, which are here today, just to make the language palatable for you and I, and to be able to understand. The other thing that I was interested to find out when I was going through this book, which interested me the most was, were there any other Bible translations during the time of King James? If they were, what were they? And we're going to spend a bit of time looking at these Bible translations. Yes, they were. The answer is yes, they were. There were some other Bible translations. There used to be a Bible called the Matthew's Bible. This Bible was published in 1537, and it was in circulation. But for some reason, it did not pick up. Nobody was using, it was not being used as much as King James would have loved it to be used. In addition, there also used to be what is called the Geneva Bible. Now, this Bible was published in 1560. That's when it was published, and it was published in Geneva. And that's why it is called the Geneva Bible. Now, why was it published in Geneva? As you know, Geneva is in Switzerland. And until I went to Switzerland myself, I used to think that Geneva is the capital city for Switzerland. It is not. Geneva is a famous city, as you know. It's a place where people like Miles Coverdale and John Knox and people like John Calvin were. And these were the people who were directing the Geneva Bible to be written. Today, Geneva is renowned for housing or for hosting some agencies for United Nations. Today, we find Geneva is a cosmopolitan city, and it has a very great influence with French, although it is a city in Switzerland. Now, this is the city where this Geneva Bible was published, because these people had fled England because of the persecution which was taking place. And so when they were in Geneva, under the guidance of Miles Coverdale, under the guidance of John Knox, and also under the guidance of John Calvin, these bishops were able to produce or to translate what today we call the Geneva Bible. There used to be a Bible called the Bishop's Bible. The Bishop's Bible was published, in 1568, and it was commissioned by the Church of England by a committee of 17 bishops. The bishops that were organized or that were commissioned or who were commissioned to come up with the Bishop's Bible. But apart from that, there used to be another Bible called the Reims-Douay Bible, which was published in 1582, the New Testament, and the Old Testament was published in 1609 and 1610. Now, this Bible was published in France. It was written, or rather it was being commissioned in the city called Reims. That's where it was commissioned. Now, this city is very, very special. Why? Because this is the city where all the French monarchs went to be crowned as kings. This is also the city in France where today you would find the Notre Dame. And in that building, that's the place where this particular Bible was written in, Reims-Douay Bible. And so there used to be a Bible called Reims-Douay Bible, and it was published in 1582 rather, and 1609 and 1610. So the answer is yes, there used to be some other Bibles, and these are some of the examples of Bibles that used to be there. Were there any misprints when they were preparing this Bible? Were there any errors which were being which were made? Before I answer that question, I just want to recognize that in our congregation this morning, we may have some people or some students who are preparing to do their HSC exams. And this won't be, but in about 4 weeks' time, you're going to do your HSC exams. And when you do your HSC exams, one of the papers which every student has to write is that of English, high school certificate exams. So you're going to do the English language to be able to qualify or to get the HSC certificate. Now, as a student, you're going to be given time. The time, of course, may not be enough or may not be enough when you finally start sitting for that exam. But this is my advice for you. Those of you who are doing HSC, when you finish writing the document, it might be comprehension, it might be summary, may I advise you strongly to proofread it. Spend a bit of a moment, no matter how short the time you may have. I would like to probe you to be able to proofread your document. Why? Because when you proofread your document, that gives the final polish to your words. It ensures clarity of the message that you want to pass on. Please proofread your document. I can't say it better than that, but please proofread your document. Go over it and revise it, of course, time allowing. Check your errors, check the punctuation, check the spelling, check the mechanics, and check even the formatting. That can make a difference between you obtaining a distinction and somebody just getting a pass. So the question is, were there any misprints in the King James Version? I would like us to go to the Bible, please. And let's read from the book of Ruth, chapter 3, verse 15. The book of Ruth, chapter 3, verse 15. The Bible says, King James Version, also he said, bring the veil that thou hast upon thee, and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her. And she went into the city. That's how King James Version translated that particular verse. New King James Version says this. Also he said, and bring the shawl that is on you and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 ephahs of barley and laid it on her. Then she went into the city. Let's look at some other Bible versions. What do they say? The New International Version says, he also said, bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out. When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. Let's have a look at what the other Bible versions phrase this particular part of the text. The Geneva Bible and also the New American Standard Bible, they are marked in yellow there because they were written similar to the way the King James Version and the New King James Version were written. On the other hand, the New English Translation and also the American Standard Version, they were written the way the New International Version were written. And so they quote there that he went back to town. And as a result, this particular section, we find that sometimes the Bible is called, or that particular section is called the He and She Bible of the book of Ruth. But let's have a look at some other mistakes which were made in the process. There's a Bible which is so called the Wicked Bible. And why is it called like that? I'll show you in a moment. Please turn with me to the book of Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. This is where the Bible says, thou shalt not commit adultery. The mistake which was made was, and it says, thou shalt commit adultery. And that's why this particular version of the Bible is called the Wicked Bible. As you can see, the word N-O-T, or not, was left out. And because of that, this was a massive error which could not be tolerated. And because of that, the Bible, or the version which had the word not missing out, is referred to as the Wicked Bible. Would really God say, thou shalt commit adultery? Would he say that? No, he wouldn't. That was a mistake. And that's why I'm talking about proofreading. Of course, it's very hard for you yourself to find the mistake that you've written. In programming, by the way, that is called a logical error because you left out the not. The program will run, but it won't execute properly. The Wicked Bible. So what happened to these people who committed such a huge error? Well, they were fined 300 pounds. That was that's the amount of money they had to pay for making that error. Now, for you who's writing HSC, you may not be fined. The trouble is you may not be able to get a distinction. Or you may not be able to get an ETA of 9.99. That's the difference. But for these people, 300 pounds. Now, 300 pounds in today's terms, well, I couldn't go backwards to see the inflation then. The furthest back I could go was 1750. In 1750, 300 pounds was about $118,976 Australian dollars. That's how much they were charged. That's how much they were fined for making that error. The point here is that we are humans and we do make errors. And please go over your document over and over again before you submit it, lest you make these type of errors which are going to cost you your life. Let's find out what was happening in the UK, in the United Kingdom, in England and Scotland. Was it also happening at the same time in other parts of Europe? Were they also involved in translating Bibles? This is something that I was interested in, and I thought I should share it with you. Yes, the answer is yes. We find at different times they were publishing the Bible. We're going to see exactly when it was happening in which countries. We find in France in 1511, they published the Bible there, and we go to Germany, 1534, they published their own Bible. They published the Bible. Of course, by this time we had the printing press, and Bibles were and books were being printed and published. So Germany, 1534. In 1537, we had the Matthew Bible, which was published. And then we had in Sweden, 1541, their vernacular Bible in the Swedish language was published. And then in 1550, in Denmark, the Danish Bible was published, 1550. In 1560, as we saw, the Geneva Bible was published there, 1560, in Switzerland. In Poland, 1561, we had the first Polish Bible published in the Polish language. And then in Spain, the Bible couldn't be published in Spain. Why? Because the Catholic Church there wouldn't allow the Bible translators to be able to do the work from Spain. So what did they do? They fled to Switzerland again. But this time, not in Geneva, but in the city north of Switzerland, which is called Basel. Some of you may have heard about Basel. If you love tennis, Roger Federer sometimes plays tournaments in Basel. My wife and I have been privileged to go to Basel, and it's amazing to see the history which is in that city. It is in the city of Basel that the first Spanish Bible was published, because the Catholic Church wouldn't allow it to be done in Spain. In Hungary, we had the Bible first published in 1590. Finally, of course, in 1611, we had the King James Bible published. As you have seen, yes, there was a movement happening there, and the wave reached England much, much earlier, but King James felt it strongly that he needed to put in his 2 cents and publish what you and I have today, which we call King James Bible, sometimes called the Authorized Version Bible. My call this morning and my legacy this morning is, you ask yourself, what legacy am I going to leave behind? Of course, here we've seen that King James, there is a Bible. And this book is the most famous book that you would find in homes today. I'm going to read a poem which is written by some unknown person. This person says, "My life shall touch a dozen lives before this day is done. Leave countless marks for good or ill. Earth sets the evening sun. This is the wish I always wish, the prayer I always pray. Lord, may my life help other lives it touches by the way." Could this be the words that inspired one of my favorite artists or musicians called Steve Green when he wrote his song, "Find Us Faithful"? The words that he wrote have left an impression on my soul and on my life, spiritual life, that I would like to share them with you. Steve says, "We are pilgrims on the journey. We are pilgrims on the narrow road, and those who've gone before us line the way, cheering on the faithful and encouraging the weary." You may have been watching Tour de France. And in Tour de France, wherever these cyclists pass, there are villagers lining up along the road, cheering these people. Go on and encouraging them. And these are the words that this man says, cheering the faithful and encouraging those who are weary. Now, you may be weary this morning. Just know that there's somebody who's here to cheer you up. Just know that God is there to be able to cheer you up on this wearisome journey that you and I might be on. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. All those who are going to find us, may they find us faithful. May the fire of our devotion light their way. May the footprints that we leave lead them to believe. The footprints that I leave others to believe. The footprints that you leave behind, may they lead them to believe. And the lives that we live, inspire them to obey God. And I hope and pray that these words may be able to find room in your hearts, so that when you are long gone, like King James, your life will be able to inspire others to obey God. May all who come behind us find us faithful. And of course, we'll find here that King James Version, his legacy still lives today. And we have the Bible that he managed in our hands, called the King James Version. May the life that I leave behind bear the spiritual footprints that lead others to God. May the life that you leave behind bear the spiritual footprints that may lead others to God. May they be like those of King James. May God bless these words. Amen. Shall we pray? Dear Heavenly Father, we have seen how this man was so inspired to embark on the project that led to the publication of the King James Bible, which bears his name. And Lord, may we follow the footprints that is left behind, so that, Lord, others may find the way to you. May this be our prayer and our wish, and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.